Tonight, we're going to travel back into a world that no longer exists. A world of ice and quiet plains. A world where the wind shaped the earth and fire shaped our ancestors. A world where humans were only one small part of a vast, ancient wilderness. We'll walk through frozen valleys, across mammoth-haunted grasslands, and into the dim glow of cave sanctuaries lit by ember and breath. Together, we'll drift through tens of thousands of years, watching lives unfold in the cold silence of the Pleistocene. Before we begin this journey, I'd love to know where you're joining from tonight and what time it is for you. It always amazes me. The thought that, across all the corners of the world, people drift into sleep beneath different skies, yet we meet here, in this quiet moment, to explore the same ancient story together. So if you feel comfortable, let me know your place in the world, your little pocket of the night. Get ready. Let's step into the Ice Age. The world that rises around us is colder, quieter, and older than anything we know. Stars wheel above an earth that seems to breathe frost. Wind brushes over ridges of snow and stone, carrying grains of ice like drifting sand. Beneath this endless sky, the ground lies hard and clean, patterned by the tracks of animals that have walked these plains long before our kind ever arrived. We stand at a moment suspended inside deep time, somewhere between 40 and 50,000 years ago, in the heart of the last glacial cycle. The planet is the same one we know, but dressed in another form, shaped by rhythms older than humanity. Ice stretches across continents. Seas shrink as water is locked into frozen sheets thousands of meters thick. The air is sharper, the seasons harsher, the distances between hospitable places longer and more demanding. Yet life persists, not in spite of the cold, but because of it. Far to the north, the ice sheets rise like pale cliffs, shimmering faintly beneath the moon. They move so slowly that even a human lifetime is nothing to them. They pulse according to cycles in the Earth's orbit, slight tilts and wobbles in the spinning of our planet that invite the glaciers forward or allow them to breathe back. These vast sheets press the land beneath them, carving valleys and redirecting rivers. To early humans, they were not geological processes, just the distant ancient presence that marked the northern horizon, unchanging and eternal. Between the ice and the forests further south stretches the mammoth steppe, a world of cold grasslands, open skies, and deep silence. It is one of the richest ecosystems the Earth has ever known. Winters are long and brutal, summers short but abundant. Flowers bloom in sudden bursts. Herds migrate over distances so vast they seem unreal by modern standards. This land is built for endurance, patience, and constant motion. The mammoth steppe extends across what we now call Europe, Siberia, Alaska, and the Yukon, a continuous belt of grass and wind that once wrapped around nearly half the northern world. It is dry, cold, and yet astonishingly fertile, supporting an array of animals that seem mythic from our vantage point. But here, their presence is ordinary. They breathe steam into the morning air, their silhouettes soft against the rolling tundra. The wind curls softly around us, carrying the faint scent of crushed snow and withered grasses. Somewhere in the distance, a herd moves. Slow, rhythmic, the sound of heavy bodies shifting across frozen ground. Life in this world is sparse but purposeful. Every creature knows the cost of energy, the necessity of movement, the precarious balance between warmth and cold. The sky above is clearer than modern skies, washed of the haze of industry, revealing stars in numbers difficult for us to imagine. On cloudless nights, The Milky Way stretches like a pale river across the heavens, a shimmering band that early humans, Neanderthals and Denisovans alike, would have gazed upon with quiet wonder. For them, the night sky was not distant or abstract. It was a familiar companion, something woven into the rhythm of their lives, their myths, their journeys. As the planet cools and warms in its slow cycles, vast glaciers advance and retreat. Grasslands expand and contract. Seas rise and fall, revealing land bridges, the pathways of migration that future humans will walk unknowingly across. These changes unfold so gradually that no single generation recognizes them as transformations. Yet over thousands of years, the world subtly reshapes itself, preparing new landscapes for life to inhabit. Here, on this icy earth, time moves differently. It does not rush. It accumulates. Moments feel suspended, and every breath of wind seems to have travelled a long distance to reach this place. If you listen carefully, you can hear the world breathe, not metaphorically, but in the sighing of wind along the plains, the settling of snow, the cracking of distant ice. These are the voices of a planet alive in the cold. In the distance now, shapes begin to appear through the silver-blue haze of the morning. They move slowly, deliberately, enormous silhouettes against the openness of the steppe. As they come closer, their outlines sharpen, long curved tusks, towering shoulders, thick coats of hair rippling in the wind. The first of the great animals of this frozen world emerges from the silence, stepping into view as if they have always belonged to this moment. The woolly mammoth. But this is only the beginning. Soon more will come, creatures that once ruled these plains with strength, grace, and patience. Creatures that lived alongside our ancestors, shaping their fears, their stories, their survival. And so our journey continues, deeper into a world where life moves slowly, where every footstep leaves a memory in the frost, and where the past stretches before us like a vast, unbroken plain. The mammoth steps forward through the quiet frost, its breath blooming in pale clouds that drift slowly into the morning air. Each exhale is a soft plume that vanishes almost as soon as it appears, carried away by the wind that sweeps unbroken across the steppe. Its massive feet press deep impressions into the frozen ground, leaving behind a trail of memories, footprints that may last days or weeks or disappear within the hour, depending on the whims of weather. Its coat is dense and dark, layered with coarse outer hair and a soft underfur that traps warmth close to its body. Snow gathers lightly on its back, dusting it with white. In the amber glow of early light, the mammoth appears almost like a moving hill of fur and muscle, slow and purposeful, as though carved from the earth itself. Mammoths are not hurried creatures. They move with the patience of the land, accustomed to distances measured in hundreds of kilometers and seasons that demand endurance above all else. Surrounding the great matriarch are younger mammoths, smaller but still immense. They stick close to her, bumping occasionally against her side, comforted by her presence. Mammoths lived in tight-knit herds, guided by the leadership of older females whose memories carried knowledge of distant water sources, safe valleys, and migration routes that stretched across entire continents. In their intelligence and social structure, they were remarkably close to modern elephants, emotional, perceptive, bonded by family. The grass beneath their feet is tough, frosted, and low to the ground. Yet this sparse landscape sustained millions of animals. The mammoth steppe was not barren. It was a cold grassland rich in nutrients, supporting far more biomass than the forests that would replace it after the Ice Age ended. Here, the soil remained dry and firm, favouring hardy sedges, grasses, herbs, and mosses, a quiet but abundant feast for creatures adapted to extracting life from the cold. A little distance away, movement stirs against the wind. Another creature steps into view, the woolly rhinoceros. Short-legged, broad-shouldered, with a sweeping front horn long enough to rival a sword. Its fur is thick and reddish-brown, more similar to a muskox than the rhinos of the modern world. The woolly rhino's breath comes out in small, forceful bursts. Its ears flick, scanning the horizon for threats. It is a solitary creature, wary, but also powerfully built for the demands of this world. These animals were not rare curiosities. They were the common giants of their time, as ordinary to ancient humans as deer or cattle are today. Their presence shaped the ecology of the steppe. Mammoths trampled paths through deep snow, creating trails used by other animals. Rhinos cleared shrubs. Even their dung provided nutrients that fed insect life and enriched the soil. Every movement they made helped sustain the land in subtle but essential ways. Further along the plain, the silhouettes of steppe bison cluster together, steam rising from their bodies. Their horns curve outward like crescent moons. These bison were larger than any living relatives, with thick humps of muscle along their shoulders to help plow through drifts. They gather in herds hundreds strong, huddling for warmth and protection. When they move, the ground vibrates faintly, a low trembling that early humans would have felt through their feet long before the animals came into view. Now, the wind shifts. A different shape appears near the crest of a small ridge, sleek, graceful, powerful. A cave lion, larger than any lion alive today. Not maned, not quite like the lions we picture, but more muscular, built for the cold. Its fur is pale gold, blending into the grasses and frost. It moves silently, its paws leaving almost no trace. This is a creature of precision and patience, a hunter that knows the rhythms of the herds better than any human. The cave lion is not alone. Behind it, a second shape follows, perhaps a mate or an older cub learning the patterns of stalking prey. Lions of this time were formidable predators. They likely hunted in groups, driving bison into chaos or separating young mammoths from the herd. Yet even for them, life was a careful balance of hunger and opportunity. The cold demanded constant energy. Every hunt had to count. Close to the foothills, in the shadow of a limestone outcrop, a cave bear stirs from within its winter den. Larger than modern brown bears, these giants weighed as much as a small car. Their diets were mixed, leaning heavily toward vegetation, though they would not turn away meat if they found it. During the deepest winters, they slept, conserving their strength through months of darkness. Their dens, deep hollows carved into rock, would later become sacred chambers for humans, filled with bones, charcoal, and art. And there are others, more subtle figures across the landscape. A herd of wild horses, manes stiff with frost, heads low as they graze. A pack of hyenas watching from a distance, their eyes bright, their laughter silent in the cold air. A solitary saber-toothed cat, its canines long and curved, yellow-white against the shadowed ridges of its jaw. The faint outline of an Irish elk, its immense antlers branching like dark winter trees. Each creature carries a lineage older than human memory, shaped by climates that came and went over hundreds of thousands of years. This world is not quiet because nothing happens. It is quiet because every creature knows how to move with the landscape, slowly, efficiently, with respect for the cold. As we walk through this ancient steppe, we begin to understand why early humans found this land both intimidating and awe-inspiring. The Ice Age was not empty or dead. It was full of life, movement, tension, beauty, and survival. It demanded resilience, but offered abundance. It rewarded those who listened to its rhythms. And early humans listened well. But before we meet them, before we step into their firelit shelters, their migrations, their art, their rituals. We must understand the world that shaped them. A world where climate was not static, where the ice advanced and retreated like a slow tide, where animal populations rose and fell with the grasses, and where the very ground beneath their feet changed across generations. The Ice Age was a teacher, and its lessons were written in wind and stone and bone. Soon, we will follow those lessons and the people who learned them. But for now, let us linger with the giants a little longer, watching as mammoths sway, bison drift into their morning march, and lions melt into the pale grasses. These creatures are not yet gone. In this moment, they live before us, vivid, real, and present on the breath of the cold plains. And somewhere beyond the next ridge, where a thin plume of smoke rises into the dawn air, the first humans are waiting. The plume of smoke drifts upward in a thin, wavering line, barely visible against the pale morning sky. It carries with it the scent of burning spruce and the faint warmth of a sheltered fire, tended through the night so that morning would not begin in darkness. Where there is smoke, there is survival, and where there is survival, there are people. Just beyond a low rise in the land, a small group of early humans move slowly through the frost. They are wrapped in hides, stitched carefully together with sinew and bone needles. Their footprints press into the hardened snow, each step deliberate. They do not rush, there is no need. Their pace matches the steady rhythm of the cold world around them. These are Homo sapiens, our ancestors, anatomically modern humans who walked this earth with the same bodies we carry now, but with lives shaped entirely by the land. Their faces, if you looked closely, would be familiar, their eyes bright, reflective, their expressions subtle but unmistakable. They are us, simply living in a different chapter of time. One of them carries a bundle of firewood. Another holds a long spear tipped with flint, its point carefully napped into razor edges. A third walks slightly behind, glancing often toward the bison trails etched into the tundra. Their senses are tuned to distance, sound, scent, light, attuned to the world in ways modern people rarely are. Their breath rises in soft puffs. Cold air fills their lungs, sharp but invigorating. The hides around their shoulders rustle lightly as they walk. Beneath those hides are layers of fur and grass that trap warmth. Clothing in this world is an extension of survival, not decoration. Every stitch, every wrap, every knot serves a purpose. The group is small. Early humans rarely lived in large bands. A typical community might contain 20 or 30 people, but they often split into smaller units depending on the season, the availability of game, and the needs of the children and elderly. These shifting groups were flexible, fluid, shaped by relationships rather than rigid hierarchies. They speak to one another softly as they travel. Their language is full and developed, not primitive. They use complex grammar, metaphors, jokes, expressions of emotion. They share memories, warnings, stories. Early humans relied on speech to pass knowledge through generations, migrations, routes, hunting techniques, myths explaining the stars, the behavior of animals, the spirits of places, the cycles of weather. If we could hear their language, we might not understand the words, but the cadence would feel familiar. Rising, falling, emphasis, soft pauses before important ideas. These rhythms are older than writing, older than agriculture, older than almost everything we associate with humanity. The people approach a sheltered valley carved out between two low ridges. Here, a cluster of hide-covered structures forms a temporary camp. Smoke rises from another fire. A pair of children sit near the entrance of a shelter, tracing patterns in the frost with small sticks. They look up as the adults return, their faces brightening. Childhood in this world is short, but meaningful. Children learn early, not through instruction, but through observation, imitation, and immersion. Inside the camp, a woman grinds pieces of ochre against a flat stone, creating fine, red powder. Beside her lies a carved piece of bone filled with animal fat. A container for pigment. Ochre is more than colour. It is symbolic, sacred, used in rituals and burials, and perhaps simply for decoration or expression. Its presence here says as much about these people's inner lives as any artifact could. Nearby, an older man shapes a stone tool with skilled precision. Each strike of the hammerstone detaches a thin flake of flint, revealing a new edge below. He rotates the core in his hand, studying the angles, listening to the sound each strike makes. Tool-making is not just a skill, it is a form of intelligence, requiring planning, memory, and motor coordination. The sharp points he creates today might be used for hunting, scraping hides, cutting wood, or carving bones. A short distance beyond the camp, faint tracks appear along the frozen ground, not human, but human-shaped in significance. Homo sapiens were not alone in this world. Not far from their range, often sharing the same valleys, hunting grounds, and water sources, lived another species of human, the Neanderthals. Stronger, shorter, broader. Their bodies were built for cold. Their chests wide, lungs powerful. Their limbs compact and muscular. If we stood beside one, they would not appear monstrous or strange, simply different. Their faces carried traits that we might recognize in some modern people. Heavy brow ridges, wide noses adapted for warming cold air, large eyes suited to dim environments. For thousands of years, our species lived in overlapping ranges. They likely observed one another from a distance, curious and cautious, aware that the world was shared rather than owned. The meeting of humans and Neanderthals was not a singular event. It happened repeatedly, in forests, river valleys, coastlines, and caves, sometimes peacefully, sometimes tensely, sometimes intimately, leaving traces written into our DNA. But for now, these early sapiens remain unaware of the Neanderthal presence beyond the horizon. Their focus is on the immediate tasks of life, preparing food, repairing tools, watching over the children, tending the fire. Fire is the true center of their world. Its glow cuts the darkness. Its warmth defies the cold. It shapes the rhythms of night and day. Around the fire, they butcher meat, tan hides, tell stories, and share moments of quiet companionship. Firelight flickers across their faces, carving soft shadows, revealing the movements of their hands as they gesture with speech. As evening comes, the world cools further. The sky deepens into blue, then indigo, then the velvet black of an ice age night. Stars ignite overhead. Countless stars, undimmed by artificial light, sharp and crystalline in the cold air. These stars guided migration routes, inspired stories, helped track seasons, and perhaps even gave comfort. The humans draw close to the fire. Children drift to sleep first. Adults sit a while longer, speaking softly, reflecting on the day, planning tomorrow. In this quiet moment, their world feels small, warm, and intimate, a fragile circle of light in an endlessly dark and ancient landscape. Yet beyond the glow of the camp, beyond the crackle of burning wood and the soft murmurs of conversation, other lives stir in the darkness, lives that belonged to another human species whose story we're about to enter. Because the Ice Age was not shaped by one humanity, but several, and one of them, the Neanderthals, lived here long before us. Long before our ancestors reached many corners of this frozen world, another humanity called it home. They walked these same valleys and sat beneath these same skies. They hunted the same herds, tended their own fires, sheltered in caves carved by time, and raised children through winters as long and dark as any we could imagine. They were Neanderthals, not a lesser version of us, not a failed experiment, but a fully realized branch of the human family. Strong, intelligent, adaptable, emotionally complex. A people shaped by the cold, by time, and by the demands of Ice Age survival. Their presence in this landscape was ancient. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years, far longer than Homo sapiens have existed. Their cultures rose and fell with the movements of ice sheets, their tools evolving through cycles of climate and migration. They left behind stone flakes, hearths, pigments, ornaments, and the faint traces of dwellings, the scattered clues of a long and intimate relationship with the land. In the dusk light of a glacial evening, the silhouette of a Neanderthal figure becomes visible near the entrance of a shallow cave overhang. The figure lifts an arm to push aside a hide curtain, revealing the warm flicker of firelight inside. A soft orange glow spills outward, painting the snow in subtle shades. From within, voices murmur quietly, drifting into the cold air. The Neanderthal who steps out into the night is broad-shouldered, thick-limbed, powerful. Their neck rises from their torso in a smooth line, built for conserving heat. Their chest is deep, lungs wide, ribs gently curved to maximize breath. Their face is familiar but distinct. Wide nose, prominent brow ridge, strong cheekbones, eyes reflecting the firelight with a deep, steady intelligence. They stand still for a moment, listening. The wind whispers along the ridge. Snow shifts in small drifts near the cave mouth. The night carries no immediate danger. Inside the shelter, the group moves with quiet coordination. A woman tends to a child, wrapping them in soft furs. Two adults scrape hides to soften them for clothing. Another grinds pigment, perhaps red ochre, perhaps black manganese dioxide, into a fine powder. The rhythmic scraping of stone against stone mingles with the soft crackle of firewood. Contrary to old stereotypes, Neanderthals were not brutish or incapable. They made fine tools, carefully shaped stone points, scrapers, flakes and blades, with delicate retouch. They built shelters by anchoring hides over wooden frames. They crafted ornaments from eagle talons, perforated shells, and coloured stones. They used glue derived from birch bark, a complex chemical process requiring controlled heating and oxygen management. Their hands were skilled. Their minds were sharp. Their cultures were adaptive and enduring. The Neanderthal inside the shelter turns a piece of wood slowly in their palm, shaping it with a flint flake. The motions are confident and practiced. They pause occasionally to examine the angle, the grain, the tactile feel of the surface. These crafts were taught through generations, not by instruction manuals, but by demonstration, imitation, and long experience. The firelight dances on the walls of the cave. Shadows of bodies move gently, their movements steady and purposeful. The smell of cooked meat lingers in the air, alongside the faint, earthy scent of hides and stone dust. Outside, the cold settles deeper into the valley. Frost spreads across the grasses like a thin, sparkling veil. Above them, the stars brighten, forming constellations that may have held stories, now long forgotten. Neanderthals knew the sky as well as we do, perhaps better, for it was their only ceiling at night, their guidepost in migrations, their silent witness to birth, love, loss, and survival. For a moment, imagine stepping inside this shelter. You feel the warmth on your face, hear the soft murmur of voices. See the uncomplicated intimacy of a small community living together, depending on one another, in ways that feel deeply human. A mother hums quietly as she rocks her child. Two siblings tease each other, exchanging looks and half-suppressed laughter. An older man sits with his back against the cave wall, staring into the fire with the peaceful contemplation that comes only with age. These are the ordinary moments of Neanderthal life. Moments of calm, routine, and connection. Although Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived distinct lives for most of their history, genetic evidence shows that the two species encountered each other multiple times across the Middle East and Eurasia. These meetings were not purely hostile or fleeting. In fact, all people living outside sub-Saharan Africa today carry between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA, inherited from interbreeding events that took place roughly 50 to 60,000 years ago. These genetic fragments are not random. Several influence immune function, skin physiology, stress response, and the way our bodies adapt to colder climates. The presence of these genes demonstrates that Neanderthals were not an evolutionary cul-de-sac, but part of a broader human family that shaped our biology. Their disappearance did not erase their lineage. It simply wove it quietly into our own. They cared for their sick, buried their dead, protected their young, shared food, comforted one another. Their social groups were small, but that made bonds tighter, not weaker. In these close-knit bands, every life mattered, every relationship carried weight. A child's cry would be met with several attentive faces. A wound or illness became a collective burden. Elders were not discarded, they carried memory, stories, paths across the landscape. Many older Neanderthal skeletons show healed injuries, broken bones that would have rendered them unable to walk or hunt for long periods. This healing tells a quiet story. Someone fed them, helped them move, cleaned their wounds. They were not left behind. Outside the cave, the wind rises slightly. The Neanderthal standing there listens to it, reading its direction, its scent. They understand the signs of weather as intimately as we understand the glow of a smartphone screen. The world speaks to them in subtle ways. The movement of clouds, the texture of snow, the tracks pressed into ground frost. Far beyond this small valley, another group of Neanderthals moves through a dense stand of Ice Age pines. Their steps are nearly silent, their bodies weaving between trunks with ease. They know every scent in this forest, every shift in light. They pause near a tree scarred by the antlers of a passing elk. One crouches, touching the marks, gauging how long ago the animal passed, which direction it moved, whether the herd is near. This is not instinct. It is knowledge, inherited, practiced, refined. Neanderthals were master trackers, attuned to the minute details of their environment. They hunted with thrusting spears, approaching prey at close range, a dangerous but effective strategy that required coordination and courage. They understood the movements of animals not abstractly but viscerally, by living in synchrony with them across generations. And yet, for all their strength, Neanderthals lived in a world that was changing beneath their feet. Climate instability created waves of cold and warmth that reshaped forests and plains. Herds shifted routes, rivers froze earlier or later. Glaciers advanced, sealing off migration paths. The land tested them, again and again. Still, they endured. Tonight, one imagines them settling into their shelters, much like the sapiens we saw earlier. Fire flickering, meat roasting, children drifting to sleep against the warmth of fur, laughter muted by the cold air. Conversations spoken softly beneath the weight of survival and companionship. For thousands of years, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived in separate worlds that slowly drifted toward contact. The disappearance of Neanderthals was not the result of a single catastrophe, but rather a combination of pressures that unfolded over many millennia. Their populations were small and geographically fragmented, leaving them vulnerable to sudden climate swings that repeatedly transformed their environments. Neanderthals required large, calorie-dense prey to sustain their powerful bodies. yet repeated cold snaps disrupted these ecosystems. At the same time, Homo sapiens were expanding across Eurasia with larger social networks, broader diets, and technologies that enabled long-range hunting. This flexibility allowed sapiens to recover from environmental shocks more easily. While conflict between the groups may have occurred in some regions, the archaeological record suggests a slow, uneven replacement rather than a violent overthrow. In the end, competition, climate instability, and demographic disadvantage all played a role in the fading of Neanderthals, even as their genes lived on in us. As sapiens expanded northward and westward, Neanderthals watched from forests and hillsides, sensing the presence of another kind of human, similar yet strange. The meetings would be cautious, curious, perhaps even tense. There is no evidence of systematic warfare or genocide between sapiens and Neanderthals, yet it is unlikely their coexistence was entirely peaceful. Competing for the same water sources, hunting grounds, and shelter would have created tensions, especially during periods when climate stress reduced available resources. Isolated incidents of violence almost certainly occurred, just as they do between rival human groups today. But the archaeological record does not support the idea of a sudden, violent extinction. Instead, the disappearance of Neanderthals seems to reflect gradual demographic absorption through interbreeding, displacement from key habitats, and a long-term decline exacerbated by environmental instability. Their end was not a single event, it was a slow erosion shaped by overlapping worlds. But in this moment, before their worlds fully converge, each species lives its life according to rhythms ancient and resilient. Each dreams beneath the same stars. Each tends to its young. Each seeks warmth, food, companionship, and meaning. For now, the Neanderthals remain here in the quiet valley, gathered around their fire, shaping tools, preparing food, caring for one another, unaware that their story, long and rich, will someday be told not through their own voices, but through the scattered traces they left behind. Soon, we will explore the meeting of these two humanities and the world they shared, sometimes briefly, sometimes intimately. But before that, there is another presence in this ancient world, seldom seen, faintly understood. A humanity whose footprint in time is light, yet whose descendants walk among us still. Their story lies deeper in the shadows of mountains and caves, waiting, in the high altitudes of southern Siberia, where mountains rise like ancient stone guardians and winter grips the land for most of the year. There is a cave that holds one of the most extraordinary secrets of human history. To the people who lived here tens of thousands of years ago, it was simply a shelter, a place of refuge from the bitter cold, a natural hearth of stone. But for us, it has become a window into a humanity we never knew existed. This place is Denisova Cave. Its chambers are quiet now. The only sounds the soft settling of dust and the faint whisper of wind across its entrance. But in the deep recesses of the cave, archaeologists have uncovered fragments of bone and tooth that reshaped our understanding of who we are and who we once lived alongside. The first clues were small, almost unremarkable, a child's finger bone, no larger than a pebble. But when researchers examined it, they found a genetic signature, unlike Neanderthals, unlike Homo sapiens, unlike any known species. A sister lineage, a ghost branch of humanity. These were the Denisovans. Although Denisovans are known primarily from fragments of bone and tooth, their genetic legacy is astonishingly clear. Modern populations in Melanesia, Australia, and parts of East and Southeast Asia carry Denisovan ancestry, in some cases reaching 6% of their genomes. One Denisovan-derived gene, known as EPAS1, enables modern Tibetans to thrive at extreme altitudes where oxygen is scarce, a physiological adaptation that likely originated in Denisovan populations living in high mountain environments. These genetic signatures reveal that Denisovans were far more widespread than the archaeological record alone suggests. They met, interacted, and interbred with multiple groups of Homo sapiens across the Asian continent, leaving molecular echoes of their existence long after their physical traces faded. Little remains of them. Unlike Neanderthals, who left behind skeletons, tools, pigments, hearths, and footprints in dozens of sites, the Denisovans left only whispers in the soil, fragments of finger, teeth the size of walnuts, slivers of bone later determined to belong to a young girl who was herself half Neanderthal and half Denisovan, a child of two worlds, silent for tens of millennia, until her DNA revealed the intimate texture of prehistoric contact. Yet from these tiny pieces, a vast story emerges. One woven through genetics, archaeology, climate history, and the migrations of our own ancestors. From the findings described in the humans who went extinct, we know that Denisovans occupied Siberia during periods when Neanderthals also roamed the region. Their distribution likely extended far beyond the cave where they were first discovered. The genetics of modern populations support this. People from Tibet, Nepal, Oceania, and parts of Southeast Asia carry Denisovan DNA in varying amounts. This suggests a wide presence across Asia, with population hubs in places we have yet to uncover. In Kindred, Rebecca Ragg Sykes emphasizes a crucial truth. When we find only a few fossils, it does not mean a species was rare, only that the archaeological record is incomplete. The deep past is selective in what it preserves. Climate, soil chemistry, predators, and chance determine what reaches us. The scarcity of Denisovan remains tells us more about the fragility of evidence than about the size of their populations. Still, what we lack in bones, we gain through genomes. Denisovan DNA reveals a lineage adapted beautifully to the harsh challenges of their environment. A gene variant carried by modern Tibetan peoples, one that enables the body to process oxygen efficiently at extreme altitudes, comes from Denisovans. This adaptation is unlikely to arise in a low-altitude species. It places Denisovan activity in rugged, mountainous terrain where survival required biological innovation. Their teeth, unusually large and robust, suggest a diet demanding heavy chewing, perhaps roots, tough meats, fibrous plants. Their skeletal features, inferred from genetic modeling described in recent studies, indicate strong limbs and broad torsos similar to Neanderthals, well suited for high-altitude cold climates. But Denisova Cave tells us more than biology. The layers of sediment reveal occupation by different human groups over tens of thousands of years, sometimes Neanderthals, sometimes Denisovans, sometimes both. A girl buried in one layer was found to be a hybrid, her mother a Neanderthal, her father a Denisovan. She is a quiet testament to a world where different human species met, interacted, and sometimes formed families. This was not an anomaly. In Sapiens, Harari explains that ancient humanity was rarely isolated. Species overlapped, exchanged genes, ideas, and perhaps cultural practices. The boundaries between us and them were far softer than modern depictions suggest. The Denisovans, like the Neanderthals, were entirely human, simply adapted to a different region, shaped by different climates, living different lives. What tools did they use? We still don't know in detail. What symbols did they carve? No one can yet say. What stories did they tell under the vast Ice Age sky? Those are lost to time. But what remains is their imprint in us. The genes that help some populations thrive at altitude, the traces found in Pacific Islanders and Indigenous Australians, the faint genetic echoes that whisper of meetings in dark forests, on windswept plateaus, in valleys where rivers once flowed beneath glaciers. The Denisovans existed not at the edges of prehistory, but at its heart. Their world interlocked with ours. Their children sometimes became ours. Their legacy continues in quiet, invisible ways, in breaths taken atop the Himalayas, in subtle immune responses, in the inherited resilience of ancient peoples. The cave that shelters their memory still stands. Excavations described in archaeology texts show layers of occupation spread across more than 300,000 years, making it one of the most continuous records of human habitation on Earth. It is a living archive of deep time, each layer a hushed chapter in a story gradually coming into focus. For now, the Denisovans exist mostly in fragments and inference. Yet their presence fills the Ice Age like a distant constellation, faint but real, unseen but radiant with meaning. As our journey continues, we now walk through a world inhabited not by a single humanity, but by several, each shaped by the climate, each possessing tools and rituals, each carving out meaning beneath the vastness of Ice Age skies. And with these three branches, sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, sharing continents and occasionally sharing families, the stage was set for the next great chapter. The deep rhythms of daily life that all human species experienced. The shared challenges and rituals that defined existence across the frozen earth. Night fades slowly from the Ice Age world, replaced by a grey-blue light that creeps gently across the horizon. In a shallow valley where a cluster of early human shelters stands beside a frozen stream, the day begins not with sudden activity, but with the gradual stirring of life beneath layers of warm fur. For early humans, sapiens, Neanderthals, and perhaps even Denisovans in their respective regions, daily existence was a continual negotiation with the land. Yet their lives were not frantic or chaotic. They were rhythmic, seasonal, predictable in their demands, but full of meaning. Archaeology reveals this not through dramatic scenes, but through small details, a stone tool smoothed by repeated use, the distribution of hearth ashes, the arrangement of sleeping spaces, the bones of animals processed with remarkable efficiency. These fragments, described in works like Journey to the Ice Age, build a picture of societies that were not primitive at all, but deeply adapted, organized around cooperation, knowledge, and the intimate reading of their environment. Morning light enters the shelter. A woman rises first, stirring embers with a stick, coaxing the fire back to life. Throughout the Ice Age, fire was not simply heat, it was the center of social existence. People slept close to it, cooked over it, sharpened tools beside it, told stories around it. Firelight shaped cognition, a concept explored in Sapiens, where Harari notes that the long hours of quiet conversation around flames may have played a key role in the emergence of shared myths and abstract thought. Outside, the cold air bites at skin and breath, but inside the shelter, the warmth lingers. The woman adds small twigs, then larger pieces of wood. A gentle crackle fills the air. Soon, others wake. Slowly, stretching beneath layers of hides. Children are last to rise, tucked deep within furs or nestled against older relatives. Human sleep cycles were attuned to temperature and fire. Waking gradually was not a luxury, but a natural response to the environment. Once the fire is strong again, the members of the group begin their daily tasks. The first priority is food, not because starvation is immediate, but because hunter-gatherer life demands constant attention to calories. Yet this does not mean relentless hunting each day, a misconception long embedded in popular imagination. Instead, as shown through studies cited in the humans who went extinct, hunter-gatherer foraging patterns are flexible, efficient, and optimized to avoid unnecessary energy expenditure. Winter diets varied depending on region. In the far north, they relied heavily on large mammals, mammoths, bison, reindeer, horses. In forested areas, they gathered nuts, berries, roots, and edible plants even in colder months, storing them in pits or hide bags. Rivers and lakes provided fish, preserved by freezing or smoking. Barrow, rich in fat, was especially prized and extracted with remarkable skill. But food was not only hunted, it was managed. Scrapers found at prehistoric sites reveal careful hide preparation. Bone tools show crafting for sewing, weaving, and preparing plant fibers. Grinding stones reveal the processing of roots, seeds, and tough vegetation. Human diets were broad, diverse, opportunistic. Neanderthals, too, long stereotyped as pure carnivores, are shown in kindred to have eaten mushrooms, plants, nuts, cooked tubers, and even sea resources depending on the region. A small group of sapiens leaves camp shortly after sunrise. Their bodies are wrapped in layered clothing meticulously crafted for insulation. Animal hides, fur-lined boots, woven grasses, and even early forms of tailored garments, stitching holes punctured by bone needles, protected against the cold. These needles, found at sites from Siberia to southern France, reflect delicate craftsmanship and a level of cultural development that would carry humanity through the harshest climates on Earth. Two hunters walk ahead, carrying spears tipped with flint or bone. Their goal is not necessarily to kill today. Instead, they are tracking herds, learning their movements, reading subtle signs in the landscape. Animal trails, droppings, nibbled shrubs, trampled snow. Each detail speaks volumes to experienced eyes. This knowledge was not written. It was lived. Children learned by watching elders. Teenagers built skill through imitation. Adults refined expertise through years of practice. Elders provided memory of winters long past, of where herds once crossed river valleys, of which sheltered hollows stayed warmest during storms. Near the camp, a woman crouches beside the frozen stream, breaking the thin ice to draw water with a hide container. Beside her, another crushes bones to extract marrow, separating fragments with deft motions. A third works quietly on repairing footwear, threading sinew through carefully punctured holes. These tasks, although domestic, required immense knowledge. Journey to the Ice Age described ancient toolkits containing dozens of specialized implements, burins for engraving, awls for piercing, scrapers for hides, microliths for arrows or harpoons, bone chisels for woodworking. People in the Ice Age were master craftsmen and craftswomen, shaping materials with skill honed over generations. Around midday, when the cold sun hangs low but strong enough to soften the surface of the snow, the group's hunters return with new information. They tracked reindeer moving southward, found fresh signs of bison, noticed unusual disturbances in a patch of snow that may indicate wolves or cave lions in the area. This knowledge shapes the next steps: where to travel, where to sleep, how to distribute labor. A child approaches one of the hunters and imitates their gait, playfully exaggerating the careful placement of steps. The adults laugh softly. Even in the Ice Age, childhood contained moments of lightness and exploration. Anthropologists note that play is a universal human behavior, linked to social learning and cognitive development, essential for acquiring hunting strategies, motor skills, social cohesion, and emotional intelligence. By afternoon, the entire group prepares to move. They travel lightly. Mobility is their greatest asset. Camps could be assembled in minutes, dismantled just as quickly. The Ice Age demanded adaptability, a lesson emphasized in Sapiens, where Harari notes that early human success derived not from strength or size, but from cognitive flexibility and cooperation across groups. As the group moves south along a narrow valley, shadows begin to stretch across the snow. They follow familiar landmarks, distinctive rock formations, twisted trees, the direction of prevailing winds. These markers were more than navigation aids. They were woven into oral traditions, shaping stories that explained the land, its dangers, and its gifts. When the group stops to rest, one person kneels to examine tracks left by an animal earlier in the day. The print is wide and deep, likely a steppe horse. The edges are crisp. Snow around it is slightly disturbed. They read the landscape the way modern humans read text, fluently, unconsciously, with a lifetime of experience. Later, as the light fades and the cold settles again, the group finds a sheltered place to establish their evening camp. They gather wood, lay out furs, rekindle the fire with sparks of flint striking pyrite, a method known from archaeological evidence across Ice Age Europe and Asia. Soon, flames rise once more, crackling softly, warming faces and hands. Children lean against adults. The smell of cooked meat fills the air. Hides rustle as people wrap themselves for the night. Voices fade into quiet conversation. And in these hours, in the glow of firelight, early humans did something profoundly important. They told stories. Stories about the hunt. Stories about spirits, animals, ancestors. Stories about beings in the night sky or memories of places visited long ago. Stories explaining the world, shaping identity, preserving wisdom. Cognitive archaeology suggests that this storytelling, this communal exchange of meaning, was one of the key developments that separated Homo sapiens from all other species. It gave us the ability to coordinate, to imagine, to hope, to fear, to believe. But sapiens were not alone in their storytelling. Evidence from kindred suggests Neanderthals also engaged in symbolic thought, burying their dead, collecting pigments, shaping eagle talons into ornaments, selecting unusual stones for reasons beyond utility. This world, though harsh, was full of meaning, shared, created, and passed through generations. As night covers the steppe again, the fire's glow stands out against the darkness, a fragile circle of warmth in a vast, frozen land. But within that circle lies everything that defines humanity, cooperation, skill, memory, tenderness, curiosity, and the quiet, enduring search for meaning. Tomorrow, the group will travel again. They will cross rivers, follow herds, explore new valleys. Their world will shift with the weather, with the seasons, with the movement of animals. But tonight they rest, bound together by warmth, by story, by firelight. Soon, our journey will follow them deeper, into the birth of art, into the meaning of symbols, into the caves where flickering torchlight awakened the first imagery of the human mind. Night settles fully across the Ice Age plains, and within a shelter of hides and furs, the fire burns low. Most of the group sleeps now, curled into warmth. Only a few remain awake, tending embers, watching the night, or thinking quietly in the dim glow. In this soft space between wakefulness and dreams, something remarkable begins to take shape in the human mind. Something fragile, powerful, and entirely new in the history of life on Earth. An image. It might begin as a memory, the curve of a bison's shoulder, the pattern of mammoth tracks, the arc of the moon through winter skies. Or perhaps it begins as a feeling, awe, fear, gratitude, longing. Whatever its source, the image takes form not as a practical instruction, but as a symbol, a representation that exists first in the mind before being given shape in the world. This capacity, to imagine something that is not present, to reshape experience into meaning, marks the dawn of symbolic thought. The emergence of symbolic thought represented a turning point in human evolution. It allowed early Homo sapiens to imagine possibilities beyond the immediate world, to create shared myths, and to transmit knowledge across generations with unprecedented precision. Archaeologists studying sites from Africa to Eurasia have found ochre markings, carved bone, personal ornaments, and ritual placements that suggest complex meaning systems long before the great cave paintings appeared. Symbolic cognition enabled cooperation on a scale no other species achieved, uniting communities through stories, identity markers, ancestral memory, and spiritual ideas. This cognitive revolution laid the foundation for art, religion, language, and the intricate social bonds that would carry humans through the uncertainties of the Ice Age. And from symbolic thought came art. The evidence for art in the Ice Age is rich, varied, and astonishingly widespread. Journey to the Ice Age describes engraved bone fragments from the Upper Paleolithic, carved ivory figurines from the Swabian Jura, punctured shells stained with pigment, and portable objects etched with geometric patterns. These artifacts emerge across Europe and Asia between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago, a period that aligns with the rapid expansion of modern human populations. But art did not begin suddenly, and it did not begin suddenly. In Kindred, Rebecca Ragg Sykes writes of Neanderthals collecting manganese dioxide, a pigment that does not burn but which they deliberately sought out, transported, and ground. They used eagle talons, perhaps as ornaments or ritual objects. They placed their dead in deliberate positions in caves such as Shanidar in Iraq. Whether these actions were spiritual, social, or aesthetic, they reveal minds capable of symbolic behavior. The foundations of art were already present long before the great cave paintings were created. Still, something profound happened between 45,000 and 35,000 years ago, a flowering of creativity no other species had achieved at such scale. Humans began carving objects that held no utilitarian function, engraving bones with abstract shapes, shaping figurines of animals and people, and most dramatically of all, decorating the walls of deep caverns with vivid images of the living world. The earliest securely dated cave art in Sulawesi, Indonesia, is over 45,000 years old. A painted, warty pig, rendered with careful attention to form, stands quietly on a limestone wall, as if waiting for a story that has not yet been told. Nearby, hand stencils appear, the silhouette of ancient palms pressed against the rock and blown around with pigment, immortalizing a moment of touch. These hand stencils appear across the world, in Spain, France, Indonesia, Argentina, spanning tens of thousands of years. They are simple yet profound, the first signatures of humanity. In Europe, the most famous images come from places like Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira, and Pech Merle. Deep inside the earth, far from daylight, early humans carried torches of burning resin, illuminating the smooth surfaces of cave walls. The flickering flames created movement across the rock, a dynamic interplay of shadow and light that some archaeologists believe influenced the placement of paintings. Horses gallop across stone ribs that resemble muscles. Bison turn their heads as if in motion. Lions stalk in groups, a behavior confirmed only through paleontology tens of thousands of years later. Mammoths, rhinoceroses, aurochs, ibex, owl-like birds, each rendered with astonishing skill. These are not crude drawings. They are sophisticated works of art, layered pigments, shading, perspective, the use of natural contours to suggest volume and movement. Why paint in deep caves? Many scholars propose that these places held ritual significance, sanctuaries where the boundary between the physical and the symbolic thinned. Others suggest that cave chambers amplified sound in unique ways, creating acoustic environments suited to ceremony or storytelling. Indeed, researchers have found that many painted panels occur in spots with strong echoes, where the human voice resonates like distant thunder. Symbolic behavior extended far beyond caves. People carved ivory figurines such as the Lion Man of Hollenstein, Stadel, a human figure with the head of a lion, over 40,000 years old. This object, described in Journey to the Ice Age, is one of the earliest known examples of myth-making, a creature that does not exist in nature, but exists in imagination. It is tangible evidence that humans could conceive beings beyond the observable world. Small female figurines, often called Venus figures, appear across Europe, Siberia, and even the Near East. Their exaggerated forms suggest symbolic meaning related to fertility, abundance, or identity, though their exact purpose remains debated. What matters is the impulse behind them, a desire to express, represent, and interpret. Even everyday objects became canvases for expression. Reindeer antler tools bear meticulously carved geometric patterns. Bone spear throwers are decorated with animals or abstract motifs. Ochre-stained shells and beads appear in graves and households alike. These creative acts were not done out of boredom. They required time, skill, and intention. They reflect societies with spare cognitive capacity, the ability to devote moments to beauty, memory, and meaning, rather than mere survival. In Sapiens, Harari suggests that art and myth were not luxuries, but essential tools for social cohesion. Shared symbols allowed larger groups to cooperate, form alliances, and maintain collective identities. Storytelling, ritual, and imagery bound communities together, turning small bands of families into cultural groups that could endure and expand. We do not know the stories behind these artworks. We cannot hear the songs that once echoed through the chambers, but we feel their presence. We recognize the impulse behind them, the same impulse that drives us to create music, write books, build monuments, tell stories, paint, carve, dance, dream. Art is humanity speaking to itself across time. Now, as we leave these early sanctuaries of imagination, the Ice Age world around us grows deeper and more complex. Art was only one expression of symbolic thought. Humans also developed rituals, burial practices, social identities, and spiritual frameworks, each contributing to the cultural richness of their lives. In the next stage of our journey, we step further into these realms, into the rituals of death, the ceremonies of life, and the symbolic landscapes through which ancient humans moved. These early people did not simply survive the Ice Age. They made sense of it. And in doing so, they crafted the foundations of what we now call humanity. As we walk through the Ice Age world, the land changes not only in geography, but in meaning. For early humans, every valley, ridge, and riverbank carried associations, memories of hunts, migrations, births, storms, animals, ancestors. The world itself was a living map of experience, layered with significance, and nowhere was that significance deeper than in the places where the living confronted death. Death, in the Ice Age, was ever present. It came through illness, predators, accidents, harsh winters. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, the constant closeness of mortality, early humans developed rituals that reveal extraordinary tenderness and symbolic depth. Archaeology offers a quiet, meticulous record of these practices. One of the most famous Neanderthal sites is Shanidar Cave in modern-day Iraq. Deep within its chambers, archaeologists discovered the remains of several individuals, some showing signs of careful placement, others surrounded by pollen grains from wildflowers. While interpretations vary, Kindred makes clear that these were not casual burials. One skeleton belonged to a man who had survived severe injuries, a withered arm, blindness in one eye, a crushing blow to the skull, yet lived for many years. His survival required sustained care, a level of empathy and community support often denied in past portrayals of Neanderthals. Another skeleton, Shanidar 4, lay in a position suggesting deliberate placement. Someone tended to these bodies. Someone prepared the ground. Someone stayed long enough to watch the burial take shape. This is not instinct, it is ritual. Among early Homo sapiens, the evidence becomes even more complex. In the cave of Kafse in Israel, skeletons dating to nearly 100,000 years ago were found arranged with ochre pigments, the same iron-rich mineral that appears repeatedly throughout symbolic contexts. One burial contained a young child placed with a deer's antlers, possibly as a grave offering. In Europe, at the site of Sungir, dating to around 34,000 years ago, 2 children were laid to rest side by side, adorned with thousands of beads carved from mammoth ivory. Each bead took hours of work, drilling, shaping, polishing. The time invested in these grave goods suggests that these children held immense meaning to their community. Far from the stereotype of harsh Ice Age parenting, this burial radiates affection, grief, and a symbolic worldview rich with emotional complexity. Death did not sever bonds. It transformed them. The landscapes themselves were chosen with care. Some burials appear in shallow caves, others on elevated ground overlooking hunting paths, still others near rivers, sources of life, travel, and migration. These locations were not random. They reveal a sense of place tied to memory, narrative, and meaning. Meanwhile, deeper in Europe, in the caves decorated with magnificent paintings, signs of ritual may also be present. Journey to the Ice Age notes that many painted chambers are difficult to reach, requiring climbing, crawling, and navigating narrow passages by torchlight. Some chambers contain traces of ancient fire, footprints of children and adults, and even scattered remains of torches left behind after ceremonies. In the cave of Chauvet, researchers found the skull of a cave bear placed deliberately on a stone pedestal, a gesture that may indicate reverence for powerful animals. Whether this was offering, memorial, or symbolic representation, it reveals an emotional and conceptual world that extended beyond immediate survival. The bear was a creature humans respected, feared, coexisted with. To place its skull so carefully was to acknowledge a relationship between species, a relationship that carried meaning. Ritual behavior is evident in many small details as well. For collection and grinding of ochre pigments found at sites from Africa to Europe. The placement of tools beside the dead, indicating beliefs about an afterlife or symbolic continuity. The wearing of pendants and ornaments, suggesting identity, group membership, or spiritual purpose. The alignment of some burials with natural features, sunlight, water, or cave formations. These practices blur the distinction between religion, art, and memory. In Sapiens, Harari argues that the emergence of shared beliefs, myths, rituals, symbolic frameworks enabled larger groups to cohere and cooperate. Ritual was not only about death, it was about life. It was a way for humans to reaffirm their bonds, their shared identities, and their place in a world that often felt overwhelming in scale. Across the Ice Age world, death rituals tell us several things. Bodies were not abandoned, care was given, time was invested. Whether spiritual or symbolic, burial practices show the dead continue to matter. Places of burial, of art, of ritual were distinct and chosen. The patterns in the sky, the animals they hunted, the caves they painted, all formed a symbolic system that framed their existence. As the fire burns low at night, its glow illuminates the faces of a small family sitting in silence beside a fresh grave. The world is cold around them. Snow gathers quietly. But their presence, their stillness, their care, speaks to a depth of humanity that transcends time. These early people did not fear the dead as something separate. They carried them forward in story, in memory, in the rituals that bound communities together. And now, with ritual and symbolism shaping the inner life of Ice Age humans, we move into another great theme, the ecology of the world itself, and the powerful forces that shaped life during this era. Climate shifts, glacial cycles, megafaunal migrations, and the constantly changing map of the Earth. The Ice Age world was not merely cold, it was alive with motion. To the people who lived then, changes in climate unfolded slowly, almost imperceptibly over generations. But from a wider scientific perspective, this era was one of dramatic shifts, shaped by rhythms older than humanity itself. The planet's climate moved not through steady progression, but through alternating pulses, warm periods followed by plunging cold, wet centuries followed by aridity, advancing glaciers followed by retreat. These cycles sculpted continents, redirected rivers, defined ecosystems, and determined where people could live and thrive. To understand the Ice Age is to understand Earth as a dynamic machine, responding to subtle astronomical forces, geological processes, and atmospheric patterns. The Great Cold periods, the glacial phases, were driven partly by what scientists call Milankovitch cycles, predictable variations in Earth's orbit, tilt, and wobble. These cycles alter how much sunlight reaches different parts of the planet, especially the high latitudes. When summers in the far north become slightly cooler over thousands of years, ice from winter fails to melt completely. Layer upon layer accumulates, forming immense ice sheets kilometers thick. As described in The Humans Who Went Extinct, these ice sheets were not static walls of cold. They advanced and retreated like slow, grinding tides, reshaping the land beneath them. Their weight pressed continents downward. Their meltwater carved valleys. Their advance blocked migration routes and rerouted entire ecosystems. In periods of glacial maximum, sea levels dropped more than 120 meters. Entire land masses appeared, such as Beringia, the vast plain connecting Siberia to Alaska, allowing humans and animals to cross between continents. Europe's coastlines extended far into what is now ocean. Rivers flowed across what are today continental shelves. Forests shrank. Grasslands expanded. This fluctuation in sea levels reveals how profoundly the Ice Age reshaped Earth. Continents were not the stable shapes we know now. They were breathing forms, inhaling water during warm periods, exhaling it into ice during cold ones. And with these changes came shifts in ecosystems. During colder phases, the mammoth steppe expanded, a dry, windy, nutrient-rich biome that supported vast herds of grazers, mammoths, horses, bison, rhinos, saiga antelope. Vanished Giants makes clear that this biome was one of the most productive ecosystems in Earth's history, rivaling modern African savannas in biomass. These grasslands were not wastelands. They were vibrant, teeming with life, feeding predators like cave lions, wolves, and hyenas. This abundance supported human populations as well, providing consistent hunting opportunities, predictable migration paths, and open terrain ideal for tracking. But glacial periods were only part of the story. Between glacial phases came interglacials, warmer intervals like the one we live in today. Forests grew, rivers swelled, marshlands formed, species shifted northward. Human populations expanded into previously inhospitable areas. And with each shift, cultural adaptations emerged, new tools, new migration routes, new relationships with animals and plants. Yet even within these long-term cycles, climate was not stable. Ice cores from Greenland reveal sudden, sharp shifts known as Dansgaard, Oeschger events, rapid warming periods that occurred in decades, not millennia. A small band of humans could live an entire lifetime thinking the climate was stable, only for their children to experience sudden, intense change. These abrupt shifts forced people to be flexible, to move when needed, to innovate when resources changed, to adapt technologies to new landscapes. The archaeological record shows this clearly. In warmer periods, tools became more diverse, food sources broadened, and symbolic behavior intensified. In colder periods, hunting strategies specialized, shelters improved, and mobility patterns shifted. Climate was not a backdrop. It was the canvas on which early humans painted their lives. It determined where herds traveled, which plants grew, chow, how rivers froze or thawed, when people migrated, where they built shelters, chout, how dense populations could be, chow, whether species could coexist or were forced apart. Climate shaped the very lives of Neanderthals and sapiens, and may even have influenced the disappearance of the Neanderthals themselves. As the humans who went extinct argues Neanderthals were exquisitely adapted to cold, stable environments with large game prey. When climates began fluctuating unpredictably, ecosystems destabilized. Forests shrank and expanded repeatedly. Certain prey species declined. Neanderthals faced increased competition, new diseases, and changing resource distributions. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens, more mobile, more culturally flexible, expanded rapidly. Climate did not kill the Neanderthals, but climate reshaped the world in ways that favored one kind of human over another. Likewise, climate shaped megafauna fates. Vanished giants note that mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, and other Ice Age species were deeply tied to cold grasslands. When interglacial warmth returned, these grasslands shrank. Forests replaced open steppe. Moisture increased. Competition grew. The world they were built for disappeared slowly, then quickly. Human hunting played a role in some regions, but habitat collapse was often the deeper force. Climate is a silent architect. It builds worlds and dismantles them. It supports life and transforms it. Inside a simple Ice Age shelter, early humans did not understand the orbital mechanics or atmospheric dynamics that shaped their lives. But they felt the effects. They watched the seasons shift, noted subtle changes in animal behavior, sensed when the cold worsened or relented, and carried this knowledge through stories and traditions. Climate guided migrations out of Africa, across Arabia, into Europe, through Siberia, over Beringia, down into the Americas. It carved human history long before agriculture, writing, or civilization. Standing now on a ridge overlooking a glacier-fed valley, the world feels immense and fragile at once. Clouds drift low, brushing the mountainsides. The wind carries the scent of ice, soil, and distant forest. Far below, a river winds like a silver thread, carving its path through sediment laid down by ancient floods. This world is not static. It is always becoming. Changing shape with each breath of the atmosphere. Humans lived with this change, not against it, and in doing so developed a resilience and creativity that eventually allowed them to cross every continent on Earth. And it is this expansion, the great movement of people across the globe, that forms the next chapter of our journey. Because the Ice Age was not just a world of cold and animals and shifting climate, it was the world in which humans became a global species. The wind sweeping across the Ice Age steppe carries with it ancient memories, memories of footsteps, journeys, and long wanderings across continents. For tens of thousands of years, humans were not rooted to one place. They were travelers, moving in rhythms that aligned with climate, animals, curiosity, and the natural expansion of families. Humanity did not spread across the world in a single burst. Human migration patterns during the Ice Age were shaped profoundly by climate. As glacial period lowered sea levels, vast land bridges emerged, such as Beringia, connecting Siberia to Alaska, and Sahel, linking Australia to New Guinea. During wetter phases, regions like the Arabian Peninsula transformed from desert into grasslands and lakes, opening green corridors that allowed humans to move northward out of Africa. Conversely, abrupt cold events could force populations into refuges where food and water remained stable. These climatic oscillations created windows of opportunity. When the environment opened, humans expanded. When it closed, they consolidated. Migration was not a single wave, but a rhythm tied to the breathing of the planet itself. Migration was not an epic march, nor an organized exodus. Instead, it was something quieter, the gradual movement of small groups over generations driven by opportunity, environmental change, and the simple human impulse to explore what lies beyond the next horizon. To understand the spread of Homo sapiens we begin in Africa, the cradle of our species. The first migrations. Genetic and archaeological evidence places the earliest modern humans in Africa over 300,000 years ago. For much of this time, they lived in diverse, shifting environments, savannas, coasts, highlands, forests, developing a range of survival strategies that would later prove invaluable. The first dispersals out of Africa occurred long before the major wave that populated the globe. Fossils from Israel show humans leaving around 100,000 years ago. But these early migrations did not persist. Climate shifts and competition likely forced them back or led to their disappearance. The world into which they moved was not empty. It was home to Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps other archaic humans now lost to time. The Great Expansion. The major migration, the one that would populate Eurasia, began around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. This movement was not a single event, but a long process, unfolding over millennia, as described in Sapiens and supported by genomic research. Humans crossed the edges of northeast Africa, following coastlines and river valleys. They passed into the Arabian Peninsula during periods when climate conditions opened green corridors through what is now desert. From there, they expanded outward, some moving along the coast of India, others inland into the Middle East and Central Asia. These groups were small, perhaps just dozens at a time. But as they moved, they encountered and sometimes interbred with other human species. Their genomes absorbed fragments of Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry, creating the rich tapestry of human diversity we see today. Entering Europe. Around 45,000 years ago, humans entered Europe, a continent dominated by Neanderthals for hundreds of thousands of years. The meeting between sapiens and Neanderthals played out over thousands of years, involving competition, cooperation, and interbreeding. By 40,000 years ago, however, Neanderthals had nearly vanished, replaced by expanding groups of sapiens. The reasons, as explored in the humans who went extinct, are not simple. Sapiens had broader social networks, more flexible diets, more diverse toolkits, wider symbolic systems, larger long-distance alliances. In a world shaped by unstable climate, these advantages allowed sapiens to expand rapidly. Southward to Australia. One of the most astonishing migrations in human history occurred around 50,000 years ago, when humans reached Australia. To do this, they crossed open water, perhaps unintentionally at first, riding rafts of vegetation torn by storms. Australia was never connected to Asia by land, even during glacial lows. The journey required intelligence, planning, and adaptation. By the time humans reached this new continent, they encountered megafauna unlike any elsewhere: giant kangaroos, marsupial lions, enormous birds, and huge grazing mammals. These species would later disappear, influenced by climate change and human hunting, a topic explored in Vanished Giants. Northward. Into Siberia. As climate cooled again around 30,000 to 25,000 years ago, humans expanded into Siberia, an icy, harsh environment shared with mammoths, bison, woolly rhinos, and steppe lions. Evidence from sites like Yana RHS reveals sophisticated hunting strategies, ivory tools, tailored clothing, and survival techniques finely tuned to extreme cold. It was in these northern regions that humans encountered Denisovans, a meeting recorded not in artifacts but in our DNA. During periods when sea levels fell, the Bering Land Bridge connected Siberia to Alaska, forming a vast plain filled with steppe tundra vegetation. Genetic and archaeological evidence suggests humans entered the Americas around 20,000 to 15,000 years ago, though earlier possibilities remain debated. Some traveled along an inland ice-free corridor. Others followed the Pacific coast using boats or simple rafts. Within a few thousand years, humans had reached the tip of South America, an astonishing spread across an entire hemisphere. Their presence reshaped ecosystems, hunted megafauna, and established diverse cultures that would evolve independently for millennia. Ice Age migrations were tied intimately to climate shifts. During warm periods, forests expanded, offering food and shelter. During cold periods, grasslands spread, allowing humans to follow herds. When seas fell, new pathways opened. When glaciers grew, others closed. Climate created windows of opportunity, corridors of survival, and humans moved through them, guided by intuition, necessity, and sometimes by exploration. With movement came innovation, new tools suited to cold environments, bone needles for tailored clothing, spear throwers, and eventually bows. Dwellings made of mammoth bone frameworks, long-distance trade of shells, pigments, and stones. Art traditions spreading along migration paths. As described in Journey to the Ice Age, sites such as Dolny Vistanice show intricate social and artistic complexity. Ceramics, figurines, textiles, burial sites, and kilns. These were not small, isolated groups. They formed interconnected networks across continents, sharing traditions and technologies. A world fully human. By the final millennia of the Ice Age, humans lived nearly everywhere. In African savannas, in European plains, Siberian forests, Australian deserts, along Pacific coasts, and across the Americas, from Arctic to tropics. They adapted not by changing biology, but by changing culture, tools, stories, clothing, rituals, alliances. The global success of Homo sapiens is closely tied to their exceptional cultural flexibility. Unlike species that relied solely on biological adaptations, early humans survived by continually reinventing their tools, social structures, and strategies. Larger social networks allowed information to travel far beyond local groups, creating alliances that buffered communities during hard times. Symbolic communication enabled complex teaching, long-term planning, and the sharing of abstract ideas. Innovations such as tailored clothing, projectile weapons, and diverse foraging strategies allowed sapiens to thrive in environments ranging from equatorial forests to Arctic tundra. Their capacity to adapt culturally, rather than wait for evolution to shape their bodies, gave them a decisive advantage unlike anything seen before in human history. This flexibility became our defining trait. As ice began to melt and the world warmed around 12,000 years ago, humanity stood at the cusp of yet another transformation, the end of the Ice Age and the birth of the Holocene. This transformation would reshape landscapes, extinguish giants, and push human societies toward new ways of living. And it is to this great turning point, the end of the Ice Age, where our journey now leads. It arrived slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. The great glaciers that had dominated the northern horizon began to retreat. The winds carried a warmer breath. Snow that once lingered through the cold months melted earlier in spring. Rivers swelled with meltwater. Valleys that had echoed with the calls of mammoths and bison began to change color and texture. If we could stand in this world 12,000 years ago, we would feel the change before we fully saw it. The air would seem different, a little heavier with moisture. The soil would begin to soften beneath our feet. Plants that had been rare or hidden through the cold seasons would push upward, turning brown and white landscapes into patches of green. For thousands of years, the Ice Age had shaped everything: the movement of animals, the migrations of people, the building of homes, the stories around the fire. But as the ice withdrew, the world opened into something unfamiliar. Grasslands gave way to rising forests. Moss and lichen retreated, tundra landscapes shrank, rivers carved new paths through the land. In regions across Europe and Asia, birch trees were among the first to return, their pale trunks spreading across once frozen plains. Behind them came pine, then hazel, then oak. With these forests came new animals, red deer, wild boar, roe deer, species better suited to woodlands than the open mammoth steppe. But while some animals adapted to the changing environment, others did not. The extinction of the Great Ice Age megafauna was not caused by a single force, but by the convergence of several. As the climate warmed rapidly at the end of the Pleistocene, grasslands contracted and forests spread, depriving mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and other large grazers of the ecosystems that sustained them. Many populations became isolated in shrinking pockets of habitat, leading to inbreeding and genetic vulnerability. Human hunting, even at relatively low levels, added further pressure to already weakened species. Environmental stress also altered plant communities, making food sources less predictable. In some regions, these pressures accumulated slowly. In others, they struck quickly. The disappearance of these giants was a tapestry woven from climate instability, ecological collapse, demographic decline, and the expanding presence of humans. The mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the giant deer, the cave lion, the saber-toothed cat, and many more species were intricately tied to the cold, dry grasslands of the Pleistocene. Their diets, behavior, reproduction patterns, and migrations were finely tuned to the Ice Age climate. As the world warmed, the ecosystems that sustained them shrank and fragmented. Their food became scarce, their breeding cycles destabilized, predators lost their hunting grounds, prey lost safe corridors. In Vanished Giants, the collapse of the mammoth steppe is described as one of the most dramatic ecological transformations in Earth's history. This biome, once stretching across half the northern hemisphere, began to fold inward as forests expanded. Areas that were once open pastures became dense with vegetation, unsuitable for the giants who had grazed there for millennia. The world that had shaped their bodies and behaviors was fading beneath their feet. Yet climate change alone cannot explain everything. As Homo sapiens spread across every continent, they entered ecosystems already strained by warming. Small human groups possessed weapons, coordinated hunting strategies, and the ability to communicate over long distances. In many regions, especially islands and isolated landscapes, human hunting placed additional pressure on megafauna populations already weakened by habitat loss. Even low levels of hunting, spread across generations, could tip the balance. But the story is not one of simple blame. It is a story of timing, vulnerability, and fragile ecosystems. Some species disappeared long before humans ever arrived, others survived for thousands of years after humans appeared. On the island of Wrangel, mammoths lived until just 4,000 years ago, long after the pyramids were built in Egypt. Their extinction was influenced by storms, genetic collapse, shrinking food sources, and sudden environmental shifts. Across the Americas, megafauna like the giant ground sloth, the American lion, and the mastodon vanished in a wave of extinctions, coinciding with rapid climate warming and expanding human populations. The ecosystems that had defined the Pleistocene fractured, unable to maintain the delicate balance that had held for tens of thousands of years. In Europe and Asia, mammoths survived longest in isolated pockets, cold refuges where grasses remained, predators were scarce, and seasonal rhythms held steady. But these pockets grew smaller, more fragile, and more disconnected from one another. Isolation led to inbreeding, increased disease vulnerability, and population collapse. Still, the world at the end of the Ice Age was not barren. It was transforming. Life adapted. Humans adapted. In forests, new hunting strategies emerged. The spear gives way to the bow, the megafauna step aside for deer, boar, elk, people learned to harvest nuts, fish rivers, forage deeply in woodland landscapes. Their diets diversify, their shelters change. Their clothes shift from thick furs to lighter garments better suited to spring and summer. This flexibility becomes the hallmark of Homo sapiens. While many Ice Age species falter as their world transforms, humans change their lives, tools, and cultures to meet the new reality. By 10,000 years ago, the Ice Age has nearly ended. The last great sheets of ice retreat far into the Arctic. Sea levels rise, flooding coastlines that once stretched for miles. The Bering Land Bridge disappears beneath the Pacific, isolating American populations from Asia. Britain becomes an island. Doggerland, the vast plain connecting Britain to mainland Europe, sinks under the North Sea. Entire landscapes vanish, leaving only memories in stone tools and submerged forests. The people living through these changes do not know they are witnessing the end of an era. They only feel the slow shift of seasons, the growing warmth, the arrival of new plants and animals, the disappearance of others. Their lives remain shaped by hunting, gathering, moving, storytelling. Yet beneath the surface, humanity is preparing, unknowingly, for a transformation that will change the world forever. Agriculture is not here yet. Cities are still tens of thousands of years away. But the seeds of that future lie hidden within the changes unfolding at the end of the Ice Age. New rainfall patterns, wild grains spreading across fertile valleys, animals congregating along shrinking rivers. The giants of the Pleistocene fade into darkness. The great predators retreat. The ecosystems settle into new forms. The Ice Age draws its final breath. And humanity stands at the threshold of a new world, warmer, wetter, more stable, yet filled with uncertainties and opportunities that will shape the next chapter of our species. But before we cross that threshold, there is one more chapter in this journey that deserves to be told with the deepest care: the legacy of the Ice Age, the final interweaving of humans and vanished giants, and the quiet echoes that still shape our bodies, our stories, and our planet. The Ice Age did not simply end. It remained, etched into the planet, into human bodies, and into the quiet architecture of our minds. Though glaciers retreated and the cold loosened its grip, traces of this ancient world linger everywhere, subtle but undeniable. They linger in the landscapes we inhabit. They linger in the species that survived, reshaped by the pressures of a lost epoch, and they linger in us. If you walk across a northern coastline today, you might see great boulders resting improbably on hillsides or embedded in fields far from any mountain. These stones are glacial erratics carried hundreds of kilometers by ice sheets that once sculpted entire continents. Beneath the soil lie layers of sediment deposited by meltwater floods. Valleys and fjords bear the fingerprint of glaciers that carved them. Even the shape of many lakes, rivers, and coasts around the world reflect the slow movement of ice across the land. Everywhere you look, the Ice Age is still present. It shaped the blueprint of the Earth we now call home. But its legacy is not only geological, it is biological. Modern humans carry fragments of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, quiet echoes of ancient meetings in Ice Age forests, mountains, and plains. These genetic legacies influence our immune systems, our metabolism, our skin, our hair, our adaptation to altitude, and countless subtle traits. They are reminders that humanity was once a family of many branches, not a single lineage. These inheritances are not just scientific curiosities. They are the living traces of relationship, moments when species met, learned from one another, competed, cooperated, and occasionally formed families. The genes passed into our bloodstreams are small but enduring testimonies of shared history. The landscape of culture also carries Ice Age roots. The rhythm of migration, the instinct that draws humans to explore, travel, and expand outward, was forged in the vast open spaces of the Pleistocene. For tens of thousands of years, movement was essential, following herds, seeking shelter, responding to climate shifts. The human body still reflects this legacy. Our legs are built for distance, our endurance far exceeds that of most animals. Even the architecture of our inner ear retains adaptations for running and navigating varied terrains. The social structures of hunter-gatherer bands echo forward into modern life as well. The instinct for storytelling, the emotional pull of firelight, the comfort of shared meals, the value placed on cooperation and reciprocity. These behaviors evolved in small groups dependent on one another for survival. Their emotional logic still lives in us, guiding how we form communities, friendships, and families. The symbolic world that blossomed during the Ice Age continues to shape our consciousness. The first images painted on cave walls were the beginning of a long chain of expression that now includes art, religion, mathematics, literature, film, and music. The impulse to turn experience into meaning is one of the deepest legacies of our species, a gift from ancestors who sat beside ancient fires and imagined beings greater than themselves. Even our fears carry the imprint of the Pleistocene, the reflexive shiver when something rustles in the dark, the unease around deep water, the instinct to scan landscapes from elevated ground. These behaviors once protected us from predators, cliffs, storms, and the unpredictable dangers of the Ice Age world. They remain in our neural architecture, part of the ancient toolkit of survival. The extinction of the megafauna also left its mark. Ecosystems reorganized themselves in the absence of mammoths, giant sloths, and woolly rhinos. In some areas, forests became denser because mammoths no longer broke saplings. Grasslands diminished, fire regimes shifted. The disappearance of these giants led to cascading ecological changes that still influence biodiversity today. The transition from glacial to interglacial climate shapes the next great shift in human life, the birth of agriculture. As the world warmed and stabilized after 12,000 years ago, wild grains spread across fertile regions, rivers swelled, creating floodplains rich in resources. Human groups that once relied on seasonal migrations began to linger longer in certain places. Eventually, they planted seeds, tended them, stored their harvests, and formed the foundation of settled communities. Agriculture was not inevitable. It was an adaptation to changing climate, changing landscapes, and changing relationships between humans and the world around them. Without the end of the Ice Age, civilization as we know it would never have emerged. And yet, the emotional landscape of the Ice Age may be the deepest legacy of all. Imagine standing at the mouth of a cave, watching the last light of day fade across a cold plain. A small group gathers around a fire. Children laugh softly. Adults prepare tools, tend hides, share food. Someone begins a story, perhaps about animals, ancestors, spirits, or memories. The fire crackles. The night deepens. Stars fill the sky in numbers impossible to see today. This scene, repeated countless times across tens of thousands of years, is the foundation of humanity. Togetherness in uncertainty, meaning in the face of vastness, warmth against cold, light against darkness. The voice of one person reaching another, bridging the silence of night. That world is gone, but its echoes endure. They live in our longings, our fears, our hopes, our imaginations. They live in the stories we tell and the paths we choose. They live in the landscapes we walk and the memories held in our bones. The Ice Age shaped humanity, not as a distant historical curiosity, but as the forge of our minds and cultures. And though the glaciers have melted and the great beasts have vanished, we are still, in countless ways, children of the Pleistocene. Now, as our journey through this ancient world nears its end, There remains one final moment, a quiet, closing reflection that gathers all these threads together and lays them gently to rest. The Ice Age world grows quiet now. The winds that once carried snow across open plains soften into gentler currents. The fires that warmed ancient families burn low, glowing softly in a darkness older than memory. As we drift across the last moment of this journey, the world of the Pleistocene settles around us like a vast, sleeping landscape. Familiar now in its silence, in its rhythms, in its fragile beauty. The mammoths move farther into the distance, their steady footsteps fading until they become part of the earth itself. The cave lions melt into shadow. The bison herds drift like slow-moving clouds across the steppe. The last flickers of torchlight in painted caverns dim, leaving behind only the stories etched into stone. The people who once walked these lands, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and early Homo sapiens, disappear into the long tapestry of time. Their shelters collapse. Their footprints are smoothed by wind. Their fires turn to ash. Yet they do not vanish. They remain in the echoes of the world they shaped, and in the echoes held quietly within us. The landscapes they knew have changed, but their mark endures. In the shape of river valleys carved by ancient ice, in the bones and genes passed down over millennia, in the instincts that still guide us in the dark, in the stories we continue to tell about who we are and where we came from. When we think of the Ice Age, it is easy to imagine a world harsh and unwelcoming. But it was also a world full of warmth found in small shelters, in shared meals, in careful hands sewing garments against the cold, in stories whispered by firelight, in the bonds of families who depended on one another for survival. The world was hard, yet life was full. These early humans admired the same stars we see today. They felt the same hunger, the same love, the same grief, the same hope. They navigated uncertainty with courage and creativity. And they dreamed, perhaps not in the same words, but in the same deep, universal language of imagination. Tonight, as you listen, you become a quiet witness to their world. A visitor traveling not through geography, but through time. A companion walking ancient paths that still run beneath our feet. The glaciers have melted, but the memory of their cold remains in the shape of the land. The megafauna are gone, but their shadows linger in our myths and our questions. The ancient humans have long passed, but their legacy lives on in our hearts, our cultures, our shared humanity. The Ice Age was not just a chapter in Earth's history, it was the great forge in which our species was shaped. It carved our bodies, sculpted our minds, and taught us how to survive in a world that was always changing. From this crucible emerged the first artists, the first storytellers, the first explorers, the first dreamers. And even now, tens of thousands of years later, those dreams continue their long journey forward. Passed from generation to generation, carried within us quietly, like a spark from an ancient fire that never fully goes out. As we bring this journey to a close, you can let the world of the Ice Age drift gently away. Let its landscapes fade like mist. Let the distant mammoths settle into stillness. Let the painted walls of deep caves dissolve into darkness. Let the winds soften, the fires dim, and the stars turn slowly above a world long gone but never forgotten. You have walked through deep time. You have travelled alongside ancestors and giants. You have felt the breath of glacial air and the warmth of ancient hearths. And now you return, carrying their stories with you, held lightly in your imagination, resting softly in your mind. Wherever you are listening from, whatever time it is for you, you can let this final moment settle. The night is quiet. The world is safe. The past has spoken its gentle truth. And tomorrow, when you wake, the echoes of the Ice Age will still be with you, quiet, steady, and enduring.